When I conduct trainings, I don't give people inner dance. Inner dance is the doorway. The room is called consciousness. We're not interested in the inner dance. We're interested in consciousness. We're interested in experiencing who we are. We're also interested in understanding who we are. So when we put things into words, the understanding is there. And when we come to a place where no words exist, we experience it. And they're both important. Right? There is a very real science here. There's a very real psychology that we can access. Very real neurology and even biology. And inner dance gives actually like the starting point. So a lot of what was shared today, which is often shared in many rooms, they're there. The notes are there. Especially like the concepts related to death, to birth, to history somehow. I think one of the biggest traumas we hold is we don't know how to go back to the beginning. Primarily because when we were born, we weren't born into a beginning. So much was going on when you first got here. Like you hit the ground running. How much was going on? Even when you were there, you were listening to all the events already. You were already being formed when you first got there. Even as a seed, probably so much was already there in the seed. So what you're looking for is almost like a geometry where everything could fit. No matter what the data or the information, how does it fit together? So there's something very meta about it. Metacognition is consciousness becoming conscious of itself. Awareness becoming self-aware. So there's something happening to the human mind that's now accessing information like never before. Because for one, it's available, technologically it's there. Number two, we're allowed. There are many thoughts that we weren't actually allowed to think. You had to be very brave to utter certain statements. People could get into trouble. It was only maybe a little over 100 years ago when the Catholic Church took away the excommunication of Galileo Galilei for the heresy of saying that the sun was not the center of the universe. That's how recent it was that we're free to think about what is the center, what is the middle of the universe. You know, we used to believe in the geocentric model. The Earth is the middle.
Chinese thinks it's there. Chinese thinks that there's a center.
Yeah, there you go. There's so many centers. The heliocentric model is based on the Copernican model. That's a Polish thought. People are still reeling from that trauma of realizing that the Earth is in the middle. And a Polish astronomer said, no, we're revolving around the sun. So it could be a theocentric system. God is the middle. Now they're working on a new word. It's called omnicentrism. Everything seems to be the middle. Science itself, cosmology, quantum mechanics is seeing that everything is the middle. So it's okay to have an ego. It's okay to be egocentric because somehow everything is the middle. And for those parents out there, they know that. The 2-year-old or the 3-year-old is the center of the universe. It's an actual stage. And very often when you go into a spiritual awakening, you go there. You realize that you are the universe and you deserve to be the center. So where do we begin? Can we have a beginning? Can we go to the origins? One has to die almost to go to the beginning. One has to end to go to the beginning. There are certain openings within philosophy that mirrors what's happening in inner dance. One of the most common phenomena, whether it be in the experience or in the actual what's happening in the mind and in the body when we watch people go really deep, not just in the workshop or the session. Like people are going back. And one word in psychology and philosophy to describe that is there's a regression. There's a regression. We can regress. We live in a world where one direction makes sense according to time. It's to progress, to go forward. So time is not just linear, it's also forward moving. But we're witnessing another aspect of time, which is backwards moving. We named that in previous days as retrocausality. But regression is a really interesting topic. Within philosophy, the regression hypothesis was proposed by a Russian linguist. He's maybe the most important thinker in the history of man that mirrors innerdance. I believe in Russian philosophy. I think it needs to be reread within what's called Russian formalism. There was a great understanding of form, whereas in the other places in Europe, there was more interest in the meaning. The Russian thinkers were interested, what is the container? And in continental philosophy, people were asking, no, what's inside? What's the essence, the eso, the substance? The Russian thinker Roman Jakobson was really interested in the people who were losing a certain element of their mind, a certain element of memory or their psyche. And he was observing a certain disorder called aphasia. Aphasia is a phenomenon where people lose their language, their ability to speak or their ability to understand words. Sometimes people get knocked in the head, or there could be other phenomena where there's a lesion in the brain. But what he observed is people can lose their language.
Like language amnesia?
Yes. But what was really interesting about his work is he noticed that there were different kinds of aphasia. There's an aphasia he called code, and an aphasia he called context. You could either become extremely embedded in time or extremely embedded in space. I am hugely interested in this because when I've watched people go into awakening process, one of the things I noticed very early is people lose their language in inner dance. After inner dance process, some people lose the power to speak for hours, for days, for weeks, and even years. Now, this is hugely terrifying from an observer's point of view, because I think one of the biggest fears in the human is losing control. And one of the ways we can control our reality is through language. Language, as an invention, is transactional. It's process of negotiating so that you can achieve your intentions, achieve what you need. In that way, language is very causal. In the Greek, it would be rhetorical. It would be pretty much to arrive at what you want, what you need, you use language for that. So it's a huge event to actually lose language. It's huge surrender to lose language. We would want to study this. Light language is a form of aphasia. When we observe...
Can you spell it, please? Aphasia?
A-P-H-A-S-I-A. P-H-A-S-I-A. I'll elaborate why the Russian formalist tradition was really important in bringing us a possible unitive philosophy and psychology through Roman Jakobson's thought. But I just want to bear connection that the work that we're doing, inner dance, Kundalini, life force energy, Shakti this, divine feminine that, it will lead to this. There's an eventuality where it would lead to this. My proposal, through observation of hundreds, thousands of people, is that aphasia leads to regression. And as was spoken in the sharing, through all of you today, it actually leads to the child mind. And I think that's the greatest gift for people who are tired, people who are wanting to go back to the beginning. What else would be your project but to go to the place prior to language, where we can access what's called prehistory, a history that we don't know when things were not yet documented and written and has not been passed on. A deep history, an old history, an ancient history, all the way to even cosmic history. This is what we're listening to. This is literally what we're seeing. What we're seeing presented in the experience. People are remembering. Can you see the irony there? To remember, you have to forget. The Latin word for death is mori. Mi mori. I die. I remember. To have gotten here to your story, you had to forget where you came from. To remember where you come from, we have to look at the words of Don Juan when Carlos Castañeda asked him, "What is the secret to remember?" He said, "You have to forget yourself, and then you remember who you truly are." Because you have to experience just one line. You can't remember everything. You can't live your story by holding that much remembrance. So real remembrance is to become a member. Remembrance. To be part of the whole means you cannot be a part. But now you enjoy being a part. And you're trying to remember as much of wholeness and embedding that into the part. That is why it's courageous to hold this work. Because what you're holding is against what is acceptable. You are about to confront some of the greatest fears in the human construct. A lot of our innovations, a lot of our systems are actually meant to hide what you are revealing now. So there's another science that needs to go hand in hand with the study of aphasia. It's the twin. And this is the most concrete and revealing science if you were to try to understand this energetic awakening, this kundalini rising, this innerdance phenomena. When you watch the bodies, it's so obvious. I don't know why it took us so long to look at the science. So a lot of our mappings on brain regions and brain waves comes from that science. It's called epilepsy. We are inducing epilepsy. When you look at what's happening in the body's doing that, that's an epileptic seizure. What we need to do now is to define and redefine epilepsy so it doesn't have to be just those words. So why Turkey? Why this area? It was in these lands where the split happened, the schism happened. The ancient Greeks called epilepsy the sacred disease. That when people used to go into the phenomena of experiencing electricity surging, in the past people were regarded as saints. And they were oracles. They were connected. But around the time of Hippocrates, we started to diagnose that this is not just spirit, this is also something to do with the brain. So as we more and more began to diagnose, we began to judge. And we began to land into superstition and science splitting, where epilepsy is now one of the greatest fears, to lose control when people experience any electrical seizure, which is a spreading of activation. And if you really want to study this, a brain wave is a train spike of action potentials, electricity being released within the membrane potentials of the neuron. It's electricity. And when you spread that, you have these phenomena of people seeing colors, people experiencing the losing of controlled movement, the experience of seeing images, getting all of these sensations. You only have to go through the history of, let's say, the masculinization of what used to be the feminine. The judgment against the feminine that went into the intolerance of shamanism, all the way to the persecution of witches. A lot of it was connected to this. That is partly why we lost wisdom, because wisdom is founded in light and electricity. But because we wanted to contralateralize the brain, we needed to control the earth more and more. What we did outside was to create governments to found and make more complex languages, but inside we needed to limit the brain. We needed to contralateralize the left and the right. More and more, electricity became less and less. So can you see what's happening historically now? We are about to unleash it. But medicine traditionally represses electricity so that people are not allowed to lose control. There was a huge movement in the West that was started by the cousin of Charles Darwin. His name is Francis Galton, and he started a movement called eugenics. The eugenics movement was this, you know who Darwin is. It's this man who came up with the idea that there's natural selection and evolution where we're constantly improving through errors and reward. And when his cousin got wind of this, he pretty much thought that we should control humans. So the idea in eugenics is to take the people who are the bad eggs to make sure that they don't procreate. So what they did in the eugenics movement in many countries in the world, in the UK, in the US, in Finland, in Sweden, Switzerland, is to cut the fallopian tubes of the women who were diseased. And the primary target of that movement were the epileptics. That the epileptics should not bear children because it's not good to have offspring go and do these things, to lose control. We needed to become more and more controlled. That's how huge the fear is as to the searching of electricity. So what are you doing now? Inducing epilepsy in others and in you. You're now, in fact, reversing history in this way. And what that will bring about, which we're already seeing happen in many bodies, including yours, is a regression is now happening. So what is a regression? Observing so many bodies throughout the years, what I've heard and listened to as stories, very often the same. I went back to my childhood home. I went back into the womb. I remember what was happening before I had real consciousness to make wise decisions, before I had the power to act upon my life. So that's developmental in nature, but we need to be interested in the other psychology that is not easy to grasp. If you were to hold a psychology that would be apt to this kind of work, there's two. Developmental psychology is one, because of the regression hypothesis, because we now have the power to bring people back to the child. You must need to know how to bring people back to the adult after bringing them back to baby. The regression hypothesis is beautiful. It states the hypothesis that the way you lose your mind reverses how you gained it. So you want to observe how you are going back to the baby could be a reverse of how you became an adult. That's an interesting thought. Like a lot of the movements that you're doing, maybe it's a reverse of how you came here from the fetus. So the other psychology would be called evolutionary psychology. It's not about the development of you as a person, it's about the development of the species. That is why we come to places like these, to remember how did we grow up as humans. How do we remember prehistory, and then how do we look at the space in between the prehistorical and the history of the present? When you look at the history of consciousness, you cannot look just at the history of the world. You must look at the history of history itself. I'm going to repeat that. It's so meta. History itself had a history. It means that time perception did not look the same through the lens of the human hundreds or thousands of years ago. What did the world look like to a 2-year-old? And then what did the world look like to Paleolithic, Neolithic man? Before Homo erectus, what did the world look like? And maybe you're seeing it through their eyes, the primitive eyes, the 2-dimensional eyes, the 1-dimensional eyes, before you go into the 4th or 5th dimension. I've been really interested in, for example, Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia had really been interesting for me. Not just looking at the literal symbols, I'm interested in what was it like to understand the world hieroglyphically. When we were thinking through word signs, not sound signs. How did you make the shift from the hieroglyphs to the phonetic system, which doesn't use pictures but sounds, sound signs? You had to go through a huge dimensional shift to be able to do that. Now, for those of you who are going to have children, for those of you who will not have children but will have access to children, spend time with 2 to 3-year-olds and 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds. They will be your inner dance teachers. Observe them, especially when they begin to read. What is the process of learning how to read? For you to learn how to read, and for you to arrive even at language acquisition, there has to be something necessary, and that's called placeholding. Placeholding is learning to hold internal representations of what is outside. You now need to take concrete experiences of the world and represent them with placeholders inside. So that when you hear a word, a sound, when you see an image, it begins to mean something, whereas before it meant absolutely nothing.
But Egyptian hieroglyphs, it's like pictogram, it's like a picture.
Yes, it's logographic.
Yes, but it had a phonetical value as well, which is lost, so we don't know how to pronounce it, in fact. But it had a phonetical value, so it was pronouncing as well.
Meaning it had, there were extreme sound qualities in those cultures that when we were able to hold that extremity of tradition, of conservationism, because of the very slow time that they had to be what they were, we also were able to hold the image. I was talking to Emma yesterday. There's a famous song by Bread, a group called Bread, and in the first lines of the song was a question: if a picture paints 1,000 words, how would I paint you? So an image is not an image. The image hides 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, or 1,000,000 words. That's what an image does. So when you developed the eye actually translates sounds into images. It's the opposite as well. The sound actually holds a lot of images. Words found a way to combine all of that through internal representations. So go back to Egypt, go back to Turkey, go back to Greece, go back to Mesopotamia, and then prior to that, remember the time since Africa where you were walking across the earth, speaking mostly with your body, listening with your body. Your language was primarily movement-based. Before anything else, before sound and image, you understood the world by moving your body across the space and seeing what would happen. So in your work, when you are holding space and when you watch people crawling around, like babies, like cavemen, like animals, trying to experiment with like, okay, I'm gonna bump into that, I'm going to try to flop this, like some primordial creature. They're regressing. They are going back. Why are they doing that? They want to relearn things. Because we're not happy entirely with how we developed. We're not satisfied. Something happened, and it's called arrested development. We grew up too fast. A lot of our development and growth happened through survival issues. We just wanted to not be eaten by the lions, the saber-tooth, the dinosaurs. We did not have the slow, relaxed lifestyle that we have now, where we can be idle, where we can just sit in the sofa, read a book, and go back to not just deep history, but big history. Deep history is about the story of the earth before we wrote things down. Big history is the history of the universe. And the human mind can now think about the cosmos and in fact receive so much data that we're only beginning to process now in the mind and in the body. Okay, I want to go back to Jakobson, Russian formalism. I want to go back to regression, aphasia. There's a movement in Western thought where philosophy, linguistics, and psychology started to come together, and it's called structuralism. Structuralism is an event where different domains of thinking started to converge as one. Cross-conceptual thinking began to happen, where the notes of the people studying the mind started to meet the notes of the people studying spirit and studying language. So a lot of people began to speak to each other: Sigmund Freud, Roman Jakobson, Jacques Lacan, Roland Barthes. And they started to see the same thing. They started to see the one structure. It's called time and space. They started to see that you can either be navigating more into time or more into space. So go back to the study of aphasia by Roman Jakobson. It was so interesting. He noticed that when people lost their language, they could either go entirely into code. One of the first people to study aphasia was a French doctor, and we owe it to him the understanding that there's a contralateralization of the brain, that there's a left and right brain, and then they have different functions. His name's Paul Broca, and he's responsible for giving us the Broca's area, the part of the brain that's responsible for language production. He noticed that when people destroy that part of the brain called Broca's area, people have a hard time talking, and his most famous patient was called Tan. That wasn't his real name, but that's what it's called because in the hospital where he was confined, it didn't matter what he wanted to say. He had so much to say, but every time he tried to say it, he could only say one word. He could say Tan. It didn't matter if he was hungry, if he wanted to read poetry, he said Tan. Imagine getting that. That no matter what you wanted to say, you lose control because you can't convey structure. You can't convey layers. Maybe you can change the way Tan is spoken like musically. We'll get to that. It's interesting. It's not something you can control. There are actual functions there, and if you change that, you will get there. That's one kind of aphasia. That's called code. It condenses so much information into one, like, energy. There's another aphasia, and it's called context aphasia. So instead of saying one word to try to convey all of your meaning, context aphasics, they don't say one word, they say a million words, but they never arrive at the point. Code aphasics are totally just on point. No matter where they go, they just arrive at the same point. One of the things that first gets lost in context aphasics is the period. They're spacing out into the network of words to try to arrive at the essence, the heart. They just keep adding all of these conjunctions like and, but, or. There's so many options in language. The father of modern linguistics was Noam Chomsky, and he gave us this concept called recursion in language. One example of recursion in language is maybe you want to end up in the Guinness Book of World Records. And then you look for what is the longest sentence ever spoken or written. And all you have to do is take that sentence and then add like, well, he said that, and then repeat the whole sentence. There's an infinite loop in language that can extend through so much time, endlessly, never arriving at a point. When you go extremely into time, you will go extremely into context. There are people who are context dependent. They're the ones who come from cultures where they don't actually care about the point. They just want to make the connection. They're called empathic people. They're not interested in the point. They just want to open the channel. And then the information will just flow through. Some of you come from countries that are very on point. Like, okay, don't say so many words. What's the point? Germany, Finland, Switzerland. I'm really busy right now. I need to go. Like, what do you want to say? But then you have these really slow countries like the Philippines, Turkey, where people hang out. Let's just hang out. Let's talk. What the next thing that's going to be spoken about is going to be based on what was spoken about just a second ago. So now you're traveling to very context-based and very code-based places to try to balance space and time. So there is some wisdom to breaking some of these structures, which we're already seeing happening. Sigmund Freud's formulation of this is really beautiful. I can bring up also other formulations. Since there's a time and space. Coding context was Jacobson's. I wish I could draw it here, but I'll just use my hands. Remember, space is vertical, horizontal is time. So this is code, this is context. This is like on point. Freud's, I think, was the most interesting. He called it, within his dream theory, condensation or displacement.
What is it?
Condensation or displacement. So let's remember your dreams, because you guys have been dreaming quite a bit the last days, months, years. Is there just one type of dream, or are there different kinds of dreams? Now, Freud wrote the book, The Interpretation of Dreams. So he was interested in the meaning of dreams, but he was also interested in the structure of dreams. So when he joined the gang of structuralists, he noticed that there was a kind of dream where there's a condensation. There's a one situation that doesn't bleed into all the other possible elements, and you get stuck within that one scene. You can't leave that scene because there's something important. That dream is able to hold the essence of one thing. It could be one image, and I want you to think about some of your journeys where there were inner dances or whatever you want to call your sessions, where you saw a one scene and you could see the network of information that comes from that central point. One place holds the meaning, like in its totality, in its absolute sense. You'll understand this by looking at the other type of dream that he offered, and that's called displacement. A dream displacement, which you can also experience in the journey, is where there's so many dreams falling on top of each other. Scene after scene after scene after scene. so that you don't actually arrive at a singular point. So that's dreaming in time, as opposed to dreaming in space.
Would
Okay?
condensation be dreaming in space? Would condensation be dreaming in space?
Yes.
Or are they...
Yes. It's to be able... When you compare, let's say, sound to the image, when you look at a picture, that's space because it doesn't evolve over time. You can look at that next year, it's the same space. You can look at the Mona Lisa the next year, it's the same image. That's why a lot of people are so obsessed with the image, because it holds time still in space. But when you think of a song, just like I spoke about conversation yesterday, as soon as you say one word, it's already dying and then another one's being born. You can't listen to a song all in one go. There has to be discursive elements in time. So dream displacement lives in time, and to Lacan and Freud, they looked at that in psychology, where a person is avoiding going to the point. When you're trying to push meaning away, when you're trying to just avoid getting to the point, you just keep digressing, you just keep going on and on, you're not able to hold the center. So in that sense, Freud honors condensation, that we do have an aspect of the mind that's able to hold the point. So even as you travel through time, to be able to condense things, to see the big picture, means you're not avoiding anymore. You can hold the gestalt, you can hold the eso, the middle, the crux, the heart. So when you design your processes using music, using touch, using words, that becomes very important indeed. Do you just keep displacing? Do you push away? Do you just keep the train of events running? And then how do you create these moments where there's like a drop, and then suddenly people dive into, okay, this is me. Because the train stopped. The train stopped moving. Another person who contributed to the time and space constructions within the structuralist activity was Ferdinand de Saussure. Now that's a Swiss man. He called it synchrony or diachrony. Synchrony is still space where you're able to hold synchronicity, where you're able to hold the essence, the whole. Diachrony is interesting. When you meet a person, it's like, oh, I think I know you. I feel like I know you. I know your eso, I know your essence. Without even knowing the story of a person, it feels like you know them as a vibration. Do you need their story to get to know them? The answer could be no, but the answer could also be yes. There could also be a diachrony there, where the more I know you, the more I can see the parts, and then I can construct a greater whole. So can you see what we've been doing as humans? As a baby, you understood the whole because you were whole. You were born whole, but you did not understand the parts. You had no understanding of the parts. And then when you grew into adulthood, you knew much, much more the parts, but you forgot the whole. Because you weren't allowed to be the whole. So can you see why you would go back to the baby now? To remember the whole, but you can't also just be purely a baby because you know too much. So you're bringing the whole and the parts together. And that event in philosophy and in structuralism is called hermeneutics. Now Hermes is a Greek god. Hermes was the messenger of the gods. So hermeneutics has something to do with language and communication. Hermeneutics is a study of interpretation. Humans weren't actually interested in a real study of interpretation until we accessed two-dimensional language through the written word. When we began to write, when we began to read, we became interested in meaning. Now, a lot of it actually began with religion first. The book wasn't so common in the past. Not a lot of people could read and write, when the printing press was invented by a German, it changed our brain. It changed our brain. Information became more abstract. It became more available. But there was a problem there. Because we were only learning to read, we did not have the skills to read very well. We didn't know how to interpret. So think of religion. The most important book in the Christian faith was the Bible. And in the past, before the printing press, for you to talk to God, you needed to be mediated by the priest, the pope, or the bishop, who would tell you the truth. It was quite shocking to suddenly get the truth. And then they were learning to read, and then they were scratching their heads. I don't know how to read this. I don't know these parables, these psalms. I don't know how to read. So hermeneutics is born. We needed a system of interpretation to see what is good, what is bad, writing, what is more truthful, what is not truthful. We didn't know what was true. So hermeneutics was important, that had to then extend towards the arts, to government, to economics, so that we can interpret. So hermeneutics is metacognition within language. Meta-language would be the point in which humans became interested in their own consciousness. But that required that we were able to hold enough information in parts to relate that to the whole. So a lot of that began 300, 400 years ago only, when we became interested in ourselves, not just as whole beings, but as structural beings as well. We are again now there, I feel, within this energy process. What you're seeing in your journey are a lot of parts, and you're learning to relate that to the whole. That would be a huge part of the awakening process, to understand how does all of it relate to each other. Human beings now, through social media, through YouTube, through Google, are exposed to so much information. They are managing that information and being managed by that information, but no one knows what's true anymore. We don't have a hermeneutic circle where we know the relationship between the sender and the receiver, the text and the sender, the intention and the energy, the part and the whole. So we need to go back into a regression in order to understand this. Now, there was an important, interesting, weird, controversial concept in the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages in Europe. It also began in Greece. What did we look like before we were born? There was this old idea. It's a funny idea. You'll think it's a funny idea. It's called pre-formationism. It's the idea that when you were born, even when you were, like an embryo or a seed, a sperm, that you were a miniature version of the grown-up you. Even when you were there, you looked exactly the same as you look like as an adult. The idea held. In philosophy, it actually held. Aristotle himself believed that preformationism is the opposite of epigenesis. Epigenesis is based on the idea that you began with a non-differentiated cell, and then that divided, and then that divided, and then you started to build functions that would bear differences with each other. Preformationism is based on the idea that no, you were whole, and then there are no parts, you're a totality. Within preformationism, there was an observation in the Middle Ages that babies were not treated like babies. They were given clothes that adult people would wear. They never went to school. They would just be sent out to the guilds and go to work, go to the fields. We didn't treat them like children because we didn't ever believe that they were babies. They were complete as they were. They were whole. They weren't treated stupid. They weren't treated blank. So somehow, along the way, through epigenesis, through Darwin, through Jean-Jacques Rousseau, we now have other ideas that follow more the banking model where children are born empty and we need to fill them up. Preformationism believed that you were complete already to begin with, even before you came here. So retrocausality becomes a really important idea then for you to hold for the long term. Retrocausality means that even before it happened, it already happened. That is the phenomena of time that we're experiencing the energy. And you guys spoke that earlier. I knew I had to be here. But now I realize more and more that I had to be here. But I knew already before that I had to be here. Now, we live in a causal society where most people are scared to go there. People in the society are not allowed to trust. It's very dangerous to trust. Why would you trust? People would take advantage of you. It's a dangerous world. But again and again, more and more, you go into the process, what do you find? Trust. Trust is not just an emotion, it's a pre-knowing. It's called a precognition. It's knowing before it happened, it's already happened somewhere in time that is not like a time, it's like a space. I already know. And strong people, intuitive people, they know to think from their heart. It's like Salal, every time he says, I built this place, everyone thought I was crazy. But you built it because you already saw it before it happened. You saw it. You dreamt about it. It was a formality to build it. It would have been painful to not build it because inside you, I already see it. It's like pregnancy. One of the greatest pain, speaking about pain that people have, is to be pregnant and not to give birth. I'm always pregnant. It doesn't go out. I'm just seeing it, but I can't see it outside. It's just inside. Can you imagine that? Like, I'm pregnant. I'm 9 months pregnant. It just doesn't come out. The 9 months just keeps going on. It's like this endless pregnancy. I'm just dreaming it, but it's not coming into being. So regression becomes really interesting that way because when we notice people who go into aphasia, now that we're seeing aphasia is a spiritual experience, when people lose language, they often can tell what's about to happen. They literally can see it. And it seems to do with not having access to language at that point. It seems that language is built in order to be able to sequence things. And without language, when you regress in that way, that spiritual way, suddenly you see everything as a map. You see everything as a synchrony. You see everything as a condensation. Right? You see everything as code prior to context. So we're speaking this to build foundations for you, for us, so that you can hold on to this longer. Were you to have strong foundations to understand what this is a worldview. This is a consciousness. An original consciousness that also needs to go the opposite of origins, like future consciousness, like grounding it somewhere in the middle. I want to play an audio that I played earlier, but now it will mean more to you, and I want you to pinpoint certain things. What I love about this audio is it actually maps out philosophy super duper deeply. So remember I spoke about this woman in Malaysia that I did an inner dance with, where she wanted to talk, but I ended up saying what she wanted to say. I want to listen to this in parts because for me, it's very metacognitive through an experiential space. And then maybe we can open up the room into dialogue to see, okay, like I have questions or I have insight according to these. I'm going to not play the entire thing. I'd cut it up into parts and introduce some of those parts to you. Let me see if this is connected and it works.
So I need you to share.
It was so weird. I wanted to speak from the first moment. The dialogue. Gosh. It's as though you were the voice of my ego. And the movements, because it's like the movement preempted what you were going to say, which made me realize that it's already in the unconscious, the unspoken, which means every act, every speech, and every word, and every intention, it's already pre-planned. It's conditioned already before I even know it's there. When I was speaking, it was as though if the awareness is there, it would not have allowed the mind to go on a falling of its own. It was so clear because it's the same moment.
Right? Get that? There's just this weird like wavy effect, but do you understand the situation where I became her voice, so she's almost speaking here like everything coexists at one time, which is space. And she wasn't just thinking about it, she was coming from that very experience where everything was coexisting. That is not a causal universe. When you live in a causal universe, there's a power dynamic or a power construct where someone's either causing you or you're causing someone else. The most beautiful paradise would be that we're causing each other. Everything I think will be causing your experience. It could be the slightest thing. You remember the butterfly effect in chaos theory that posited that there would be the fluttering of a butterfly's wings in Brazil and it can set off a typhoon in Japan. Everything's connected. But the human mind cannot fathom what that would look like, so we're being given a dreamtime experience just to see what is that like. You need to be careful about how you flutter your wings or what you think about, because that's going to set off a hurricane in Florida or something. So the conversation continues. Oh.
So, what is time?
There's no time. It's amazing because it's the thoughts that make it real. There was never anything there.
So what are thoughts?
Energy.
What's energy? Who are you?
Just a mass of conditions. Oh my God. When I spoke, it was from a source that was unknown.
What was the question that I asked? I hope that...
Your first question.
Yeah.
So I asked her two questions. They use different words, but my questions were, and you can do this in the sessions that you hold, what did you look like before you were born? And then what would you look like after you die? So that's a technique. When you have someone in the energetic space, when you ask them these questions, they would instantly go there. If you hold enough sensitivity, slowness, gentleness, when you ask them these super simple but deep questions, they would experience what it's like before they came here or after they leave the project called Your Name.
When you were born,
What did you look like
when you were born
before you came?
Yeah. And immediately it was love. And I was shocked because that has been my misperception.
Yeah.
That's why when it answered, I was shocked and it kept popping up and I didn't want to speak it because I thought I couldn't, it's like I didn't tell where it was coming from. And then there was the second question that you asked.
If it coexists, what do you look like after you're done here?
When you asked that question, it was, I didn't die. I'm just a wave of energy.
And so you felt you actually looked like not exactly as an image.
No. Yeah, when you ask that, it's like my body just felt like a shell. It was a skeleton. It was I was not identified with the body, it was not the body.
And so you were observing
Yeah.
yourself from outside, inside
Yeah.
of what you thought you are.
It was so clear that I'm not the mind, neither am I the body.
Yeah. So what you did was you disentangled or detached or disassociated consciousness from its identification.
Yeah.
And so it suddenly became two parts, that which was watching, that which was being watched.
And the self was just the consciousness.
And so it became perception, perceiving its parts.
It's so amazing because it was neither the mind nor the body, and yet it's as though the self was in the experience and yet it knew that it was not it.
So this happened because it was spoken to, and because it was not expecting anything, it actually heard it. And because it heard it, it became it. So I was speaking to it in a very direct way. And because that was the one that was listening, it took over the other system.
It's paradoxical. It's as though when you give a voice to the ego, because the ego was talking, I need to sit with that for a while.
So right now you're still both of them. You're still speaking from it.
Yeah.
There's still the awareness of both of you integrating, because now you're sensing your structure. So everything that's ever said holds your space every day. You enter the room, you are held by the room, but because you are the room.
And you realize because the mind and the body were one, but it's not a mind or a body. It's a different meditation. And what's being spoken is we forgot that maybe this is more real as a meditation than what people are trying to do. That's why meditation as that is not working as easily and as fast and as strongly as this as a meditation.
When you look at the movements,
It's the yoga.
yeah, they approach it through form that they hope they would flow. But when flow awakens from within, now you see the relationship between the movement and the thought.
Okay, so we're approaching the actual important part of this. And for those who are asking, what is the relationship between movement, words, language, and thought? This is going to be the answer.
Yeah, I help me to understand it because I got it so many times that the movement preceded the thought.
And so thought is actually slower than the movement, because who is the movement?
But the initiator of the movement is the thought. But
No, but why does the thought? Why does the thought come before? No, why does the movement?
Why does the movement
come before the thought? Because the thought is the expression of the movement. And so the movement is an expression of something that comes before the movement. The body is an expression of the heart.
The first time I experienced this was maybe in 2003. And I'll be honest with you, it was on a shitload of magic mushrooms. Going to edit that part out. I was in that psychedelic experience, I took too much, or it was my first time to take it. It was a lot. And what I noticed was my body started to dance super strongly, like I had no control. But when that strong movement was happening, I noticed that I knew what the next song would be on the radio. And then the more I surrendered to this movement, I could control everything that everyone was doing. So it seemed like time and space and electricity and magnetism went into an inversion. How it works is when your vibration is lower than what is happening outside you, the world will cause you. But when your vibration goes higher, electricity goes up, outside magnetism will go down. So you become more the creator of the universe. I mean, what we're trying to go for is that vibration is the same inside and out. But what she's saying here is interesting. In the world, we think that thought causes movement. But what we're seeing here is that the movement actually comes before the thought. That would totally make upside down everything that we know in a causal earth.
Because the movement is non-verbal. It is a higher expression compared to the words. And
Now I get it.
yeah,
It's the intention.
yeah, the energy.
Yeah.
It's the curiosity of consciousness that's always dancing, evolving, moving.
Because if all thoughts are energy, the energy is always moving because it's the intention to move, which is translated to the thought that I want to move. But actually the intention already initiated the movement of all things.
It's the system, original system, that became curious of itself.
So it's the what if.
Yeah, if you look at the word if, it's at the heart of the word life. It's the letters in the middle. When you look at the word death, at the middle of the word death is EAT.
You eat to this for every moment you're dying.
You can see how the baby is eating the world.
Yeah.
When you go into the right brain, which you just did, you become curious, and then you move around your field. When you think, you are processing what you're consuming. You're eating the energy.
Oh my God, it's like when one is in the absolute heart space, the ego cannot live. That was so amazing. My gosh. So it was a concept in my head until now. It's like if every single meditator can experience this, it's wow.
Well, they will. This is paving the way. And if the dialogue travels, we don't even need to talk to anyone.
Okay, so this is just going to go on. I want to point something out. This becomes quite qualitative. There were some things that she said that holds keys and codes. Those two words, the most important words were phenomenal and intention. I need to help you map this out from philosophy. So intention doesn't seem to entirely hold it when we base it on how we normally know intention. My intention, what I want to happen. But based on what or where she was coming from, she wasn't talking about intention as we normally know intention to be. Now, intentionality is actually a word in phenomenology, the philosophy of phenomenology, which came from a Swiss thinker, Edmund Husserl. He borrowed intentionality from Leibniz, the philosopher. Intentionality in Leibniz was the monad. The monad is the most irreducible point. So let's say you take a word, an image, a sound, and you just keep dividing that, reducing it. The monad is, what would be the point where you can't reduce that anymore? It becomes irreducible. It becomes the heart. It becomes the central point. So what gets you out of bed? What moves you? What motivates you? What makes you live? It's the intentionality. It's the monad.
Would you say it's Atman?
It's all those. It's phenomenology is interesting to begin with because it studies the phenomenon and tries to go to the heart. It is a branch of psychology and philosophy that honors all subjective experiences, that you just keep bracketing out the phenomenon deep without judging anything. Like when you meet someone, okay, I'll pretend I know nothing about this person so that I can get to know this person at their core, their essence, their ethos, their eso. Who are they really? And inner dance, as described by many people, is a phenomenology. It's a way of bracketing out. You know what an onion looks like. And then you peel another skin, Inner dance looks at what's at the core of the onion. And when you do peel the onion, you know what that does emotionally. It makes you cry. So, there was something really powerful in what is spoken here about movement. We need to redefine our understanding of the dance or the movement. That somehow the body knows a lot more than the mind. The ancient body, the African body, the body that received the memories. And then the mind was trained to go more into sequence so that the mind became linear. The body is non-verbal. The body is non-linear. It holds space. It doesn't live in time. So when you free up the body to go beyond morals, to go beyond right and wrong, to go beyond conditioning, that's what's happening now, isn't it? Like the body is now revealing what space looks like. The body is a space. You know what happened to me when I was living in the island? I would look up at the stars and I realized I'm not looking at stars, I'm looking at my molecules. There wasn't a difference between outer space and inner space. So I came to the belief that there's only one planet, there's only one day, there's only one being. But we're pretending so that we can experience diversity. We can have story. We're now pretending there are many people and there's more than one day. I don't believe there are aliens. I think they're us in different dimensions. I think we really just got bored in oneness. So I can't experience myself. I want variety. I want to get to know myself as parts. But it couldn't. It could not. It was light, and it couldn't experience itself without darkness. It was one, and it couldn't experience itself as many. It was big, and it couldn't experience the smallness of its many parts. So that's how it becomes hermeneutic. Hermeneutics is interesting in literature. It's like when you read a book, you don't know anything about the book, so you look at the cover. I think I like this. Someone gave a review, oh, it's a nice book, and then you look at the back, oh, it looks like a good book. So where you begin with the book is the gist, the gestalt. I kind of get a general picture of the book. So then when you open the book, every time you read a word, and then another word comes, and another word comes, you get more parts. You have a greater understanding of the whole. And then the more you understand the whole, the more you can understand the parts of the story as it unravels. But can you imagine if you didn't live in time, someone would give you a book, and then you take it, oh, okay, I read it. You don't enjoy the story. That is life without time. We're so traumatized by time because it reveals only parts sequentially, one at a time. But if you didn't have it, you would just get the book, oh, okay, that's a nice story. You didn't enjoy it in parts. That's life. You can't be given the whole thing. You cannot be given the big answer. because then you wouldn't be able to enjoy every single part, savor every part. So your body now is remembering something about memory, and to connect this with looking at different playlist systems, now you can see the whole point in the sequential playlist as opposed to this weird playlist that has so many layers, that's holding condensation, synchrony, as opposed to diachrony. You still have the story, but the story is now going on all at once. We're not canceling out the diachronic, syntagmatic, displacement playlist, because it's also quite valuable, but we're giving you a taste of the space, the code playlist, so that you can combine them together. You can see that there is actually a philosophical backdrop to why we're holding inner dance, like in this way, that we are being given a choice. So what I'm giving you is a starting point, a way of reading the history of man. Our philosophies, our psychologies, there's a starting point here. There's a structuralism. When Peter, this thinker that Emma knows, who's quite a scholar, this PhD guy who's worked with some of the big thinkers in the world, also spiritual teachers, he said inner dance seems to be a TOE. It could possibly be a theory of everything. There were other theories of everything within media theories, as Marshall McLuhan had a TOE. There were other people. He said somehow inner dance is a TOE. I believe him primarily because it's also an EOE. It is also an experience of everything. So from that could also be a theory of everything, an SOE, a story of everything. A lot of this I didn't think about. The energy itself revealed it to me and to everyone who experiences it. It gives you a map of how things are. And because you follow it, you're bound to get to it with or without me. It's there. It's embedded in the system. That's why you're trusting it. Because you can see somehow everything is there. And then you hear people say, somehow inner dance is not something I'm doing. Why is inner dance everything? Because it's not something we're doing, it's a consciousness. It's a consciousness. When we talk about it in this way. So, something you're learning in language, whether we're talking about like this meta consciousness, this philosophy or not, when you're spending time with people, and you're really getting to know people from an intimate, yet detached, observant, spiritual way. When you tell stories, you're starting to input the story of the world along with your story. That you can have one conversation with a person, and somehow you're actually talking about everything. Sometimes you ask one question and a whole story of a person is revealed in like a paragraph, a sentence, or like an hour. And within that story of the person, the story of humanity and the story of everything starting to come through. And that heals us, because as babies and small children, we somehow knew there was something bigger, but our schooling system was really fragmented that, no, when you're going to learn this, focus on just that one thing. Don't relate it to the hermeneutic wholeness. That's what happened. That's what ailed us, so we don't know how to connect a one thing with everything else. So were you to reconstruct an education system or a medical system that would bring remembrance about hermeneutics is important. Relationality between parts and wholes are important. And were you to find a real starting point, if you had that project, if you wanted to go to the beginning, prior to words, prior to details, sounds, concepts, images, the starting point needs to be about vibration. Vibration was the beginning of the project. When you own up to the fact that we are gods, we're not just worshiping them, we are the being that was at the beginning that got bored. if you were going to design the universe, where would you start? It started with vibration. You built it on the vibration.
I have a question. Would it be possible for all of us to create the circumstances whereabout a human being from the beginning will never go through traumas?
I think that the way to that, which would also be the answer to everything else, would be to do with dimension. There is a dimension somewhere where everything was one. And often when people go to those dimensions, they experience danger because they're not often well understood. Shamans are always trying to put into words the things that can't be measured in words. But somehow the brain has developed enough to actually bring real context that doesn't lose code. Because a lot of people have been through so much. Dark nights and light days. So I feel that we need to access a dimension where everything was one. And I do believe observing others, hearing people speak, looking at their experiences, people are starting to enter those dimensions. There are all these amazing movies that are coming out that speaks of those dimensions, of entering the black hole and entering... that narrative is really interesting. The black hole is the part of the universe that holds infinite magnetism. And where there's infinite magnetism, there's infinite time. 1 minute on Earth could be 1,000,000 years in a black hole. When you enter the horizon of the black hole, you get pulled in, you get stuck in. And there's so much magnetism there. And you would be forever there looking at all the parts. Forever. You can review. It's called a life review. I believe that's the REM state. The REM state is the black hole. So there's something interesting to what Carolyn said that I've been thinking about and experiencing in people's experiences. So the life review is when you die, you will look at your whole life in 1 second. It's weird. It's an interesting fact. There's no time. How can you how can your whole life flash before your very eyes? That's what they say, right? My whole life flashed before my very eyes at the point of death.
In a rapid train.
How does that happen? There's no time. So people who die longer, they share something. They call it the birth vision. They say that before I entered the next life, I looked at the whole thing in its entirety, not in a linear way, but all the possible events that can comprise a being I saw, and before I signed the contract, I'm okay with that one. And then boom, bloop, you come out. My feeling is the life review, which is what you see when you die, and the birth vision are the same. I think that that's the womb space. When you look at the word home, the heart is the middle, right? What's the middle of the word home? It's Om. At the heart of the word womb is Om, and the heart of the word tomb is Om, which is vibration. The end and the beginning is a vibration. And I think the womb is not just a place in the mother's belly. It's all vibrations, and they're strings. They're super strings. You know, like the superstring theory in quantum mechanics says that the smallest point, the monad, is actually a superstring. That's in the beginning. That's in the super small. But in the super big, in the middle of the black hole, do you know what they saw? It wasn't a monad, it wasn't a point. It was a fuzzy string. It looked like a fuzzy ball. So the biggest and the smallest are actually made of strings. Those strings are vibrations. Everything is made of vibrations crisscrossing each other. Energetic lines. So I think that we're just weavers. I think that's what we are at the end of the day. We're weaving the great-grandmother's thread. And everything's passing through everything. All the points are experiencing traversal of the string. And we're visiting the dimensions where we're becoming aware of how is everything actually passing through each other. Like in a web. So that's it. That is the meaning. That is the meaning of what this inner dance is all about. Coming from all the experiences from everyone, this is the story. From there, you can expand this and study neurology, you can study psychology, you can study philosophy, anthropology, and linguistics. You'll see the same patterns everywhere. And you will be able to retain the information because it's all actually the same. You will be interested in that information if and only if you wanted to bring this into the system. If you wanted to be part of a community that will help to build the system from the ground up, from the monad or the 0 point, you need a meta theory. You need a meta structure. And there's only one. It's time and space. Everything's built on time and space. Mind is a consciousness that unravels through mind and space. You want to be able to balance them because we got stuck in time. And a lot of people getting so tired of time, they're now trying to move away from time and going into space. But when you become space, you really have to go back to history at one point in order to bring more space back to history. And a lot of people are actually avoiding history. They're trying to display story and not be in it. So let's see if you guys have any thoughts, questions, ideas, insights.
I have.
Yeah.
The
Retrocausality.
Yes, it's the thing that I think that I'm very interested because since I was young, I can know a lot of things that will happen, and then I start to live as the things already happened.
Yeah.
And that's why I don't know. Sometimes people say that I'm different, but I know live like that. But how, as I'm bring more conscience about that process of clarity, how I can work more the electricity, energy, or dancing with electricity and magnetism play, because I didn't know how the process going. Now you bring it to me.
Yes.
This dance.
Yeah.
So can I have more?
Okay.
conscience?
More, yeah. The retrocausal expert in innerdance is actually Gra. She went into aphasia more deeply than most people we know, and she explained retrocausality through experience. For her, that was really scary because she really lost her mind and her language. She was pure messiness in Maya when she was living with us. But there was something in it that was finding a huge order of things. And she can now retain so much information in a way that's almost superhuman or meta-human. So you coming from that, she's not Portuguese, but she's Brazilian speaking, so it's the same structure.
My first immersion
Was in Brazil.
Was with Gra,
Yeah. Okay.
Portugal.
Yeah. So Brazil and Portugal is the same structure language-wise anyhow. The Philippines was actually discovered by a Portuguese sailor named Ferdinand Magellan. And he's significant because he's the one who was retrocausal enough to say that the world is a circle when everyone said the world is flat. And he said, I will prove it to you. I will bring the Spanish ships, because the Portuguese king didn't believe him. But it was the Spanish king and queen said, we will give you the ships. And that's how we discovered Brazil. That's how we discovered the Philippines. And then the first people to circumnavigate the earth were the Spanish. Magellan was killed in the Philippines. But he did dream that it was full circle. So there's something in you guys that actually holds time and space as a circle. The Egyptians call it the Ouroboros. The Greeks as well. It's called the serpent eating its own tail. They believed that time was a circle and it was not like a line. So magnetism is the mind. The mind is a magnet. It holds things together. The more magnetic people are, the more they're mental. People who think from their gut. You know how they say women think from the gut. They don't think from here. They listen to their body. What do I feel? As opposed to what do I think? So when you walk into a room, what you're looking at is light. and because electricity is magnetism and electricity turning into each other, then you become aware of, what's the magnetism level here? So magnetism holds time. It allows time to function. On Earth, you're able to hold the story here through gravity. You can imagine if Earth didn't have magnetism, you'd float away. So you know what they say, when you're being floaty, you need to ground. What they actually mean is you need to heighten your magnetism. So when you're more magnetic, it means you're more organized. You want to see what electricity will do. Let's see, let's put your finger there. Let's see if that organizes you. So electricity spreads things out. Magnetism grounds and holds you. We need both. Because if you don't have magnetism, you can't organize things very well. So one of the most important neurological maps to see this is Ned Herman's 4-brain quadrant model, where he perceived that there's the left brain, the right brain, and then the upper brain and the lower brain. The left brain that's up there is called logic, the logician. This is the visionary, because it's right brain, you can see more, but it's still the thinking brain. This is the messy brain. Innerdance exists here because it's the right brain and it's the primitive brain. Now down here, this is the lower brain. It's the animal brain, but it's the left brain, so it can sequence. So do you know what they call this? After you access the inner dance, which is messy, it's animal, and it's right, so it holds a lot of space. When you bring that over to the left, it's still lower, but it's left. The name of this is the organizer. So the next step after you mess things up is to organize. You now want to organize your room. Because here, you found division. Here, it's like communication happens here. Emotions happen here. After you access that information, now you know who you are. You see the vision. Now you need to organize that. You want to organize your notes, your tools, your music, your priorities. You need to make your decisions come from the vision. Now, the birth vision. Simple. Enough magnetism, but holding enough electricity that comes from here. Does that speak to you? So magnetism is important. A lot of people are going for the ego death, the 0 point. A lot of people who do that, you'll end up in the street. You don't have any clothes on anymore, and you don't have any money. You know, it's okay if you live in India and you can have the really long hair, but if you want to really help the system, you need magnetism. Magnetism is the mind. The mind is actually beautiful too, but it needs more space. Okay, who else had?
Another question, just experimental question. For example, there were a few cases of children, wolf children or animal children, who were lost in the jungle and they were brought up by the animals, fed by the animals, and they adopted the animals lifestyle. Would these children, for example, would have the same to the sounds like we do, the same alignment
As we would.
as we are?
There were really horrible experiments in Egypt and then later on in Europe, where certain kings and pharaohs wanted to understand what is the original language. So what they would do is they'd get babies and then they would stick them inside rooms where they will have no exposure to any human culture, just to see what would be their first words, and what they would compare those words to all the other languages to see what is that. They did those experiments. The words kind of sounded like Aramaic or Hebrew, but most of the children actually died because their brains did not have dynamism. They didn't have The brain is dynamic, it wants to grow. But to answer that question, I believe that it's only a matter of time. Meaning, you could come from anywhere if you had access to space. And I feel that that's what we're giving. Space and time. There's a German term called the Zeitgeber. The Zeitgeber is anything you eat, anything you drink, anything that influences time perception. Something that speeds things up or slows things down, changing the circadian rhythms of man and women. So I lived in a deserted beach on an island for 2 years. And I found myself. So I give this gift to people, it's called innerdance. It hides the island there. I believe that what people are looking for is more time. I believe that the greatest fear people have is there's not enough time. And it's coming from the psychological driver, which in psychology describes that when you were young, there were these commands by parents that says, be this, think that. One of the 5 major psychological drivers is called hurry up. We're going to be late. So now we live in time. We're always in a hurry. Most people's belief that they're not enough, that they're poor, that they're not worthy is actually based on being hurried. You need to go to school. But you were there, coming from the universe, I'm still sleepy. Hurry up, dress up, take a shower. So you were indoctrinated not just into the world, but into time itself. So if you want to heal people, you want to give them time to grow. So your gift is actually time. So think of me. I lived in an island where no one told me what to do. No one told me what to be, what to say. Partly that's what you're looking for. I just want to be me right now. I don't want to be obliged. I don't want to be shamed. I just want to be me. But for me, time is not the thing in the watch. It's not actual time as a sequence of events. For me, time is a vibration. So that you can get someone to lay down, and when they experience antiquity, what you're giving them is time. And then when they walk away from that, they become old. So I do have this. For me, it is a thought experiment. I believe that if people had enough access to time, you would end up where a lot of the philosophers, a lot of the shamans would end up with a view of the universe as if everything was one. I think all these insights you would access as well if you could live through the earth through evolution. So what I'm trying to work out now within the energetic construct is how every human can grow as a species. I believe that everyone needs to evolve. But many people did not have the resources to access growth. So that's why I'm putting in vibrations. You can see the inner dances that we're holding. We're putting in all these things from Africa, from Mars, from just to vibration that give you a chance to grow up, to consider all of these things. We're packing in more stuff for you to grow as a plant. You'll grow like the sun. You'll grow like the planet. You'll be dynamic for you to then end up in a realization about the earth that you're in. That this is the earth, a holographic energy ball, a simulation where everything that I believe in will manifest and be created. But how much resources? Like for me, resource is simple. Re means to go back, and source means source. So the real resource is just to go back to the origins, to the beginning. But that can only happen if you are the source. That you are the beginning, you are the origin.
But you now mention your time on the island. But in fact, we are preconditioned already from the very beginning of a due time. Sort of like hurry up, because everything happens in a due time. The child starts to holding the hand within 3 months. If it's not happening, it's already something is wrong. Sitting 6 months, walking.
That whole stages of development.
Has a synchronicity in a certain time of development.
Yeah.
And if it's not happening, is it overdue? Something goes wrong. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the program is already there from the birth.
Yeah. It was a Swiss thinker who gave us developmental psychology to begin with, Jean Piaget. He gave us those stages. I think those stages will be obsolete soon because the circadian rhythms of human beings are changing so fast because of media and because of these spiritual processes, because of these psychedelic experiences. The circadian rhythms took so long to configure. It took eons, it took millions of years to write the code called the circadian rhythms, but for some reason there's like a bell curve. Like for a human population was so slowly rising, and then only when we discovered oil, only when we discovered artificial lighting, only when we started to experience globalism, after the turn of the millennium, boom, it suddenly jumped up. You chose to be alive at this time now, when the peak is like hitting, just there. It's like, boom. So the consequence to that is the circadian rhythms changed without our noticing it. People are using these technologies, eating these foods, absorbing the information, but scientists weren't talking about how is the brain changing through all these. It's not just Facebook. It's not just Google. It's not just Apple. It's the brain. The brain doesn't look the same now as it did 20 or 30 years ago. And I think we should talk about it. I think we should experience it. I think we should open it up. We should see the difference in the children and us. So a lot of those old notes will go into obsolescence. Maybe already is. That's why I bring up the circadian rhythms as a central concept. That is our offering to the world. That is a meta story. If you want to talk about, okay, what is the story of humanity? It's embedded in the wave called the circadian rhythm. Something goes up and down, it holds a story, and the story is told through vibrations. So then when you change the playlist, you're changing the story of the vibrations. You're changing the story of fear. Just almost overnight. Something that took so long to write, people are becoming fearless. The story of the heartbeat, the breathing patterns, the brain waves. Yes?
Do you have a preferred grounding mechanism?
Yes. For me, it's been knowledge and wisdom. I put a lot of time studying what we are. I expose myself to the philosophy. Etymologically is two words. It's philo and Sophie. Sophie is wisdom. Philo is love. Love for wisdom. When they built Wikipedia, they didn't really create an architecture where there would be a centralizing force. But when they studied Wikipedia later on, they found out that through 7 to 10 degrees of separation, all pages lead to one page. Even though there are millions of pages, it leads to philosophy. So there's something in us that would still go back to wisdom. So I would like to work not just with people who want to be healers, spiritual teachers. I want everyone to access. Do you want to become a philosopher? Who doesn't want to become a philosopher? We want to be DJs. But to be philosophers means to be curious, to wonder. So for me, I ground myself not through repetition, not through behaviorism. I'm a natural person. I'm going to do what I feel like doing. I want my heart to tell me. But if I spend hours per day, I look at complex information. I go to philosophy and look at what did humans who had time and space and had that commitment, and how did we build a construct? Every time we stood on the shoulders of those who came before us, there was a whole lineage. I'm interested in not from a literal sense, because I believe that the structures are breaking. But I don't think we can actually build something new without accessing something old. So in my inner dance consciousness, when I read the books, I do see the patterns hugely, because the energy holds a container and a structure that mirrors all the small things according to the whole. So my grounding is the studio. The studio is where I create music, but the etymology of the word studio is studio. It's to study. To study is to take in. It's to absorb. It's to become one. To surrender to what is bigger than you. And then through structuralism or constructivism, when I take it in, I put it out. So I contribute. I take something old and I make it something new. You're doing that always in language. That's what structuralism is about. Roland Barthes wrote in The Structuralist Activity, structuralist man takes the object, so it's like you hear something. Takes the object. The listening act is a decomposition. By listening to me, you're decomposing the object. And now when it's your turn to share this, based on what you know, when you bring it out through your articulation, you will recompose what you decompose. I love those words because when you plant a garden, you can't use the banana peel. You can't just use you need to decompose those in the compost so that nitrogen becomes nitrates, potassium becomes potates, NPK. Phosphorus becomes phosphate. And then the plants can use the basic elements to construct the flowers and the fruits and the roots and the trunk and the branches. So you take the old. For me, inner dance, do you know what it is? From my story, it's very clear. I was severely traumatized and battered when I was a child. I was bullied in high school like crazy. But there was something about me where I actually accepted the pain. I never fought. That was something my dad taught me. My dad told me, don't fight anyone. And he took that seriously so that I actually loved my bullies. So when you study the process, when you ask someone to lay down in trust, and then the music starts to come and trigger you, to bully you, to invade you, to colonize you, when you allow it to come through you, you transform it. You decompose it. You with your unconditional love, take the pain and then convert it to something new. Take the shit and then make something golden out of it. Do alchemy with it. That's unique because most people in the world, that's what they don't want to happen. They don't want to receive. They don't want to take the projections. That's one of the greatest fears. I don't want that in my body. But it's actually an illusion. So study the process. That's what we're doing. We're getting people to absorb the world and to convert it from inside. Taking the darkness and making that into light. It's very scary to do that, to become super vulnerable and open. You like that, and it's passing through you, and you make something new out of it. For me, the greatest grounding is unconditional love. It's full acceptance of that. And that could be, for some people, energy. That for some people could be an emotion. When it passes through me, it's information. It doesn't pass through as emotion anymore. It just becomes part of a book. I accept it in pure objectivity. I don't hold it in my body. It just passes through. So, yeah, developmentally, you can go through these stages. Some people will be energy, some people will be emotion, some people will be information. Lira.
I have a question about aphasia, is that what you say?
Aphasia, yeah.
Aphasia. So, okay, personally I've experienced like forgetting languages or synesthesia during an event, but then it comes back.
Yes.
So is it somebody who didn't come back? Or even outside of in a dance world, if somebody is diagnosed with this, would it be like a forever thing, or is it something that could be developed? And the second part is I used to work with autistic children
Okay.
who were very end of the spectrum, and they were all non-verbal, but the majority of them had echolalia, which is they only speak when you speak, like they're just repetition.
Yeah.
Is that also a form of
Yes.
aphasia?
Let's tackle the first one. People would come back. I wasn't able to relate it really well, but people who go through epileptic seizures often cannot talk afterwards. So there's a direct correlation there. When electricity surges through the corpus callosum, the arcuate fasciculus, innervating the whole brain, language stops. It means that language is actually magnetic, and the more electricity you hold, you won't be able to be linear. Electricity isn't linear in that way. But because the world is very magnetic, language would come back. So I haven't really seen anyone, except for one woman, go into aphasia for more than a year. Most people I saw maybe days or weeks. The first time I saw this was in Chiang Rai, where I was doing a retreat in Thailand, where Jo, I don't know if you know Jo, she used to run across the Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, Kopangan, and Bali crowds where he used to live. She's a lawyer who moved to Britain, London. And she goes really deep. She's Hong Kong Chinese by origin. And the Chinese, especially the Mandarin speakers, are the most right-brained people in the world. Mandarin is the most right-brained language in the world. Turkish is right-brained. Any language where you need to sing the words, it's right-brained because it's tonal. English is not a very tonal language. It's very computational. Thus, it's very left-brained. So when she went so deep one day, I decided to test her. So I went in front of her. It was actually in the lunch table even, way after the session. And I asked her one question. I asked it casually but very focal. What's your name? And then I stepped back and then I waited. And she said, and then it hit her. She couldn't say it. Her name is 2 letters. It's Jo. It's J-O. For an hour, she couldn't say it. She cried, she laughed. It was terrifying and it was liberating. And everyone was just there, like, watching. Like, so I kept noticing this. The first time I saw this was in Maui, Marwin, for those who know Maui, the guy from Cebu. He went to a Cebu workshop when I don't think this was even called innerdance yet. And I was holding a session. He had a powerful 2-hour process where he was screaming. He was so loud I thought the police would come. There was something weird he was doing. I can never forget it. He was rolling around the room like he was a tire. And then there were other people there and he would literally bounce off of someone and start rolling again. And then he'd roll back and then bounce and then hit the wall and then start rolling again.
I can totally imagine.
You can imagine, this is like this guy. So later he stood up. Before all of that, even then he was the noisiest person I ever was with. He was so irritating. He kept asking about aliens, about the ancient Egyptians, about ghosts, monsters. What do I think about that?
Entities.
Right before the session. So after the session, he was doing this. He was doing like Qigong. And so I approached him and then I tried to talk to him. And then later, like I asked him, where did you learn Qigong? And then he said, I don't know Qigong. It must have been like 2 hours. When he lost his language, one of the noisiest people I know, when he was in aphasia, he knew everything. He doesn't ask questions. He just knows everything when he can't speak it. But every time he goes back to his really irritating speech mode, he just goes into displacement. So there was something in his aphasia that held condensation. So it is no coincidence that a lot of awakenings happen where people just sit under a tree, they just stop talking, don't you know. So when you do hold space, don't force some people to speak. in the sharing circle. It is really good to train people to share after the process because it allows translation between hemispheres and space and time. But if people need to stay there, think of Einstein, who only spoke at the age of 6. He had his parents worried. But he's, according to many, the smartest man to have lived on Earth. He developed the right brain before he allowed himself to go to the left brain. Here's where I bring up like Finland as the #1 schooling system in the world. They don't allow people to read and write or to do arithmetic until the age of 7 because they wanted the right brain to develop enough before people went into left brain thinking process. They don't do grading, they don't pressure the child. So I think schools need to understand we can't push people to compute before they know how to access space. Aphasia is space. So we shouldn't be afraid of this. This has something to do with electricity. So in the whole mapping within innerdance, we're building these connections. But again, we've been scared of this. I think modern society was built on the hiding of electricity and the raising of magnetism. What we buried underneath the ground, what's underground is electricity. And what's at the top is gravity and control and magnetism. So somehow this spiritual process that we're building is counteracting that whole thing. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, the other was okay. So remember where I talked about the mirror neuron system and how in autistics the mirror neuron system is disabled. That's why autistics have very poor social skills because the mirror neuron system is what allowed for empathy. If you can mirror what's happening in someone else, then you're going outside of you. So what's happening in the innerdance state is you regress into what's called the egocentric speech stage. What is egocentric speech? It happens around 2 to 3 years old. It's the initiation from the absolute to the imaginary realm, from space into time. A baby is authentic where they will not hide anything. And you will know that because when they have a thought, they will not think it inside. They will express it through their bodies outside. Before, babies develop internal representations or placeholders called memory. Before they built a library where information could be categorically, neatly ordered, they were expressing everything through the body. So egocentric speech is when language acquisition begins to happen. They copy the words. Initially, they repeat the sounds. The sounds don't mean that much. They don't categorize things, and then there's not the subordinate and super categories. There's only basic sounds. Sounds and meanings need to converge in egocentric speech. So when you see a small child talking to the wall, talking to their toys, that's egocentric speech. What they're doing is they're repeating the words in order to store them inside, thus developing internal representations where categories will now form networks within each. They're building a mind. So you know what happens when we develop a language process? When we grow old, we become secretive. We become less authentic. We start to think inside. So do you see why this inner dance thing is helping? When someone has an experience, oh, I experienced that too. That's not private speech, which comes after egocentric speech. That's public speech in Piaget and Vygotsky's developmental psychology. We're learning to become public again, to express and think out loud what many people are doing from inside. So that's a death process. Because what happens in death is interesting according to the life review sharings to people. This is what happens when you die. When you die, this is how they say it, how some people explain it. When you die, something's going to happen. You're going to inload the earth back into you. What happens when you're born? You offload the self into the other. This is how they describe it. When you inload the world back to the self, you start to see yourself as everything outside would see you. It's weird. You would look at yourself as your mom, your toys, your brother, your sister, your room. Every person you know will be looking at you, and you'll see yourself as you've never seen yourself before. You will be the objects. You'll be every thought form. You'll be the air looking at you. You'll be every part of the earth looking at you, and then poof, you're gone. But when you're a baby, it's exactly the opposite. You need to project, it's not receiving, it's projecting. You need to project the self. So now I'm storing a part of myself in my mom, in that floor, in my room, and my toys. And then you keep extending and extending and extending. So death is an inloading, birth is an offloading. So to go back to this concept of mirror, before the mirror neuron was discovered, there was a psychoanalyst called Jacques Lacan who gave us the concept, the mirror stage. Do you remember the first time you looked at the mirror? And then you looked at it again. Oh, wait, is that me? Suddenly, a vibration became an image. A sound became an image. That's the beginning of narcissism. You're not a sound anymore. Oh, is that how I look good? Oh, I'm cute. I'm super cute. So that's how you created a container for yourself. You used to be messy, and then, oh, okay, I'm just the thing. I'm a word, I'm a name, I'm a vibration. But when you saw the image, you became a self. Not as a vibration, but as a contained, stable thing. You're not a process, you're like a thing. You're an object, a commodity. You reduced yourself. You collapsed an energy into an image. So that's actually very traumatizing. To look at the mirror and become something that looks like you. And then people... so when you die, you will once again become a vibration. What would actually die is just the image. You will still be there. It's just that you're just going to be a vibration. You're going to be strings. You're going to be threads. Right? So the mirror stage is the initiation into the self as a particle and not a wave, to borrow some notes from quantum physics. The mirror neuron is an innovation in the human brain. Monkeys sort of have it, but most animals, they don't empathize. They don't love conditionally as humans do. They don't have the same attachments as we do. They don't get attached the way we do because they don't have the same mirror neuron system as humans do. Autistics, they don't have the same mirror neuron system, so they don't empathize. And in a way, they are the savants. They're super genius as well because they can access super far, but they can't relate. It's hard to relate without mirroring.
Asperger's syndrome people, they don't relate at all. They're functional. I mean, they're functional and they imitate. They can imitate empathy, but it's not coming from the energy. So it's a pure imitation on outside.
Here's something interesting that I wanted to speak to you. Alzheimer's and dementia. Super interesting. I don't know if you know about these experiments where people are exposing dementia and Alzheimer's people to music, old music, familiar music, and then suddenly it brings back memory through movement. They start to dance and then they start to become a little bit themselves. But they saw that the most effective experimentations is when you take some old music from the 1920s, 1930s that they used to know, and then they change it. they change the rhythm, they change the tempo, and it brings something back. So we're really careful with this. There are people in inner dance who are experimenting with dementia and Alzheimer's. But here's the finding. Here's the interesting point. If dementia and Alzheimer's is, in a sense, in a spiritual sense, the point in which a person got so tired of themselves that they are just willing to become babies. And aphasia is becoming baby-like. Why would we want them to come back to what they were tired of in the first place? So we're creating a womb space where they can become something else altogether. I've worked with people who have experienced strokes. When you experience a stroke, often there's a loss of persona, loss of muscular function paralysis. I don't hurry. When people are coming from brain ailments, brain disorders, brain trauma, I take my time. I don't talk to them. I bring in the music in order for them to make a decision. If you broke your persona, I don't need you to go back to something you were tired of in the first place because you allowed this break to happen. So music can become the foundation for the building of new circuits, for a neuroplasticity to happen. So I think if we work with Alzheimer's and dementia, we would want to borrow some notes from aphasia in this sense, bringing more code initially before context to allow regeneration to happen based on neuroplasticity nodes. It's actually harder to fix old circuits. It's easier to build new ones. It takes too much energy to repair old circuits. It takes much less energy to just allow new ones to. So what we do is we put the sleep playlist on. We create an environment where the thing is in the background. We don't need to do sessions. Just put in the noise app without them knowing. The brain starts to develop new connections. So I think it's the work that we do could be really important in many ways. Yes?
I think for kind of the same what you said about the autistic kids, that you would work with the parents. I also have my grandmother who had Alzheimer's. It's interesting because Olegda said your husband was 8 years or 7 years. My grandmother was the same timing. I don't know if there's something with the 7-8 year time, but she was I lived with her since I was 11 with my mom, so she was my parent, and we took care of her the last 8 years until she went. And with her, what I realized, also what we've been sharing in the study groups, is like she became a baby, like a pooping diaper 5-year-old. And for her, because she was a very strong personality, I think she wouldn't have been able to let go her physical body if she would have remembered everything. And so for her was like, I'm in gratitude that she lost her memory, because then the moment she died, she could let go, and she was very light. Like she was only the baby anymore, kind of. It was very like we had to feed her. She was home until the end. But then what was the difficult part is the anger in my mother or me, or the frustration in the close people when the other one is starting to forget. So if I now would have the tools to work with the situation with Alzheimer, I would think like my grandmother would be okay actually if she wouldn't have to go through our emotions and our anger, or my mom's anger, because my mother was the only child, that she was like aggressive towards my grandmother because she's forgetting, and the feeling was more that we were blaming her to act out, or that was the energy in the room. Like the close people are more going through the process which is suffering than the actual person who is forgetting. And then I'm thinking, if my grandmother felt that the people who are close to her are angry to her of something that she's actually going through a natural process of letting go, but that's her tool, forgetting and then leaving. it's like, okay, now I would work with my mom or with myself or with my sister, like how do we deal with it or understand what she's going through without projecting, because it's our process, because we are mirroring that close person. So, but it was really like, she was 85, my sister's son was 5 years old, and I was taking care of both of them at the same time in the apartment. And they're playing together, 8 years between, in the same way, same words. They're jumping in the sofas and being like, oh, the floor is lava, we cannot touch it. And I'm watching my grandmother, she's totally in it. And they just got along so well. So I'm really happy also that when she was in that stage, she had a child with her who totally got her. Like they got along so well in the dimension they were living in, like, yeah, poopy, whatever, you know, doing like annoying stuff, like hiding things. And then I'm like, wow, I was just watching them and trying to be the adult who is like the smart one, 30 something. And I'm like, yeah, but there's something here that I'm not actually in that dimension they are in. So, but the anger was hard, the frustration and the anger, and I think the letting go process was more for me and my sister and my mom than for my grandmother, the hard part. Actually, she could have let go easier if we would have allowed her to go through the process. We tried to hold her to stay in. Like my mom was shaking her and like screaming at her that don't act, or like remember this or that, and then suddenly my grandmother could remember because she was pushed so much in the edge, like psychologically to remember. But those moments were interesting because it was not actually, it wasn't nice for my grandmother because she was pushed to that because of what my mother was going through.
It was pressure. But it's so interesting because in Alzheimer also, my husband, he knew that he lost identity. And when I brought him already in the middle stage, we went to the restaurant, and because he was a frequenter there, so before, and people said, the personnel said, oh, Mr. Rudolph, nice to see you again. You recognizing me, he said. They recognized me, so it meant he existed. For him, this person just ceased to exist. Someone just, gave him a sign that he's still there. Someone. And it was just amazing. Because he forgot personality.
It's interesting. Some of the most interesting sciences out there, especially related to consciousness, is about when we began to lose it. Like aphasia, dementia. When we study consciousness, the regression hypothesis would be the study of consciousness as we are losing it in remembrance of how did we gain it. It's because we can't talk to babies, we can't like ask them questions. Okay, how do you see the world right now? They don't have the words. But what if we could talk to people who are about to lose it, and what if they're going back to the baby? We would get some notes on what was it like to see the world without memory, without internal representations, without structure. So we don't need to have Alzheimer's or dementia or aphasia or epilepsy, because innerdance is Alzheimer's, dementia, epilepsy, and aphasia. And childhood. We're remembering. You know what interests me when people take psychedelics? I don't know how many of you took psychedelics, but when you take enough, I don't know if you see this, but everything fractalizes and it starts to look like a cartoon. And it looks like why do we watch cartoons? Why did we watch cartoons? Maybe it's because the world actually looked like cartoons. When we were young, when we were dimensionally in there, when the information looked different.
At least
I have a question for you. Yeah, okay.
At least the kids sometimes they see that they talk about the colors. They talk about the little
fractals,
fractals
pixels.
of colors. Do you see that?
Mm.
Do you see that?
Mm. Mm.
It's like,
Because sometimes when your eyes are closed some of you, have you seen colors that look brighter with eyes closed than when your eyes are open? So you remember these 3D photographs that you need to look at them and then the images pop out? It looks like that. You need to train your eyes to see in that other dimension. That's what peripheral vision is. To train your eyes to look at the sides, the colors would pop out. They actually look more real. So when you were seeing that purple yellow thing, it looks so alive. Compared to when your eyes are open, it looks like it's more blurry actually.
Something interesting happened to me yesterday while I was visiting. There were certain people that when I closed my eyes and I looked at them, they had a specific color.
Oh,
You
that's
had
nice.
Bright pink. You had bright blue. Like I would close my eyes
That's
and I would
nice.
see those colors.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
So that's synesthesia. Some people can smell energy. Synesthetes are people who think that certain colors have, certain numbers have colors. Certain words have smells. Their brain circuits are wired weirdly so that the auditory, the visual, the sensory motor, and the semantic networks are crisscrossed. So when they hit their elbow, they start to explode in colors. They can see the sound. They can smell the colors. So it seems like you're a synesthete. We can develop that.
Cool. When you was on an island, I mean, your identity was dissolved.
Yeah.
You were,
Yeah, the stories weren't there.
yes.
Eventually,
dissolved.
anyway.
I mean, for example, we have an identity. I know I'm a woman. I know my
Yeah.
name is Olinka. I know I'm this and that and that's nationality. Da da da. And your story was dissolved on
Yeah.
the island. How did it feel?
Like I didn't need to eat or sleep anymore. Like I wasn't obliged. I was free. You know what the most painful event that happened after the island? It's when I had to get a driver's license and then a passport. I felt like my essence was being inserted into the matrix. When I look back at it now from all these stories, I realized that I became an identity again. I was going to be treated like a statistic as a person. But do you know how I felt like? I was an animal. I felt like an animal without identity.
It felt good.
I couldn't sit like this. I had to look for a branch, and then I don't remember how I would perch for hours. I would just be perching like a bird. It was the only comfortable position I could find. I was like a puma. I was like a lion. I had to train myself to sit properly again and be normal. And you know how I did that? By eating food. When I ate food, I felt heavier and heavier, and I didn't have this kinetic potential energy that was so... I felt like I could do anything. And I was born super sickly, super weak, but I was like pure power. My awareness was, we don't know what human beings are. We're barely tapping into 1% of our potential. And I felt, my excitement was, oh my God, we can be all of this. I want to tell everyone about this. It wasn't a workshop. I wanted to talk about the human potential. I was talking to you, I think yesterday. I spent $20 in 2 years. And that went to writing material. I was born to one of the most powerful family clans in the Philippines. You know, I went to the most expensive schools in the country. But I became the poorest person that I know. I was interested in pure nutrition. The Philippines is the second largest producer of coconuts in the world. So what if I just lived on that? Coconuts have the highest electricity in all known foods in the world. The electrolyte level of coconuts is like 10 to 20 or 30 times higher than anything in other food. You know, the closest would be rose essential oil. That would be at 150 hertz. Coconuts is 300. Most fruits would be at 30 to 50. So when you eat coconuts, you put your finger through that socket. Your electricity would climb up. So I felt that we have so much potential, but we're not evolving. So me becoming an animal, I think that kind of meant something like primal, the animal brain, electricity. I think humans are animals, but we learn to control the electricity so that we could have the big cities and these iPhones and we developed a thinking process, but we had to compromise electricity. So there is something about shutting off your thinking process for a while to let the feminine rise. We're way past lunchtime. Thank you. It was a beautiful morning.